Znovu vás pozdravujeme z Prahy, milí naši diváci. A tešíme sa, a je nám veľkou cťou, že sme mohli v našom štúdiu privítať pána štátneho tajomníka Norského ministerstva zahraničných vecí, pána Eyvindava Petersona. Budeme hovoriť o Norsku a jeho pozícii v súčasnej globálnej bezpečnostnej architektúre. Thank you, Mr. Peterson, for accepting our invitation. And, well, to cut straight to the chase, as they say, I would like to ask you about Norway and its position in the global security architecture, because Norway is one of the first signing members of NATO. And Norway is not a big country, actually. It's 5 million people, 7 million?
Almost 6.
Almost, oh, so you're a bit larger than Slovakia. But I dare say that you are vastly important because you were one of the few northern members of NATO. Up till now, when Sweden and Finland finally accepted the challenges and, well, went into it. What was the position of Norway towards the Russian threat from the very beginning?
Well, there was a reason why we chose to become founding members of NATO. Actually, in the early post-war years, the position of our government, their primary option was actually that we needed to cooperate even more closely among the Nordic countries. So there was specific plans on the table to create a Nordic Defence Union. But then in the developments in the early post-war years, especially what happened in Czechia in 1948, there was close connections between our leaders in the two countries. And the pressure that Finland was put under led the Norwegian government back then to the conclusion, no, we need to choose the Atlantic Alliance again, and we became founding members of NATO. And throughout the Cold War, we were the northern flank, so to speak. I grew up in the 1980s, 7 kilometers away from what was then the Soviet border, and in the whole world, that was the only land border between Soviet Russia and NATO. The wall, Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union was dissolved, and that border opened up. So there was actually quite a bit of cross-border activity all the way up in the high north. But now in these days, we are unfortunately back in a completely different situation because Russia chose war of aggression, and that has massive consequences also for our security and for our relationship to Russia.
Yeah. Was it very difficult for Norway to have that land frontier with Russia? Because, you know, for example, for Finland, it meant a certain amount of compromises they had to make not to appease Russia, but, you know, to coexist. And did it entail a certain amount of compromise for Norway too, even though Norway was in a different situation being a NATO member?
I wouldn't say so, but we have long experience in how to deal with the Soviet Union and Russia in the high north. We have been NATO members since the founding. That was always the fundament, and the Soviets and the Russians have also they've always known that. But geography matters. We were the northern flank. Sweden and Finland were not members of NATO. Our defense concept was built on the fact that our allies would come to help us if the need arose, and what we need to do was to keep fighting.
Did you feel supported enough by the other members and by the, you know, the West as such? After the Cold War, the West ceased to be responding to the Russian threat and was a bit dismissive about it, you know, trying to resolve things through business more. Well, and back then, you know, did you feel supported that even though Cold War has ended, the Russian threat never really went away. So what was the position of the West?
Well, our attention shifted elsewhere. We spent 2 decades in Afghanistan, of course, and it's an interesting fact. I think it was back in 2006-07, within NATO, Norway actually took an initiative to sort of bring NATO back home, to sort of make sure that our military officers, they had become more accustomed to the landscape of Afghanistan than the landscape of our own countries. Yeah. And it turned out to be the very right thing to do. It was a time when it was said about NATO that it needed to go out of area or go out of business. Yeah. Now NATO as such is very much back in the area and back in business. Although of course Russia's war of aggression is the reason behind it, it's a very good thing for our security, for the collective security of Europe, that NATO has transformed and adapted to this new security situation.
Definitely. I hope it keeps it up for a long time. May I ask, does Norway meet the 2% requirement of GDP given to NATO?
Yes. Well, it's not given to NATO, but yes, we are spending above 2% of our GDP on defense, and for decades we've been the #1 spender on defense in Europe per capita, but we are in a very fortunate position to be a wealthy country. But now we have managed to get cross-party agreement in our parliament, every single party represented in parliament, for a massive increase in defense spending, and we have now well past 2%. We'll continue upwards because that's the reality of the security situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah, the situation calls for it, definitely. Yes. And how do you view the other countries? Some of them are not so eager, to spend on defense.
Well, the NATO package comes with Article 3 as well, that everyone, of course, needs to take primary responsibility for your own security. My impression, broadly speaking, is that among all NATO members, there's a realization that we need to step up. I mean, the numbers and the statistics speak for themselves. And I'm also very happy from the Norwegian side, in the otherwise very, very bleak picture, the fact that Sweden and Finland, our friends and neighbors, are now also our allies, is actually a very good thing for Norwegian security, because back in the Cold War, we were a bit alone, so to speak, on the northern flank. We have land borders with 3 countries, with Sweden, with Finland, and with Russia. Now we can, of course, we've always been friends, but now we can plan and cooperate also in everything military without any limitation, and that's a good thing for our security.
That's a very positive development out of the whole negative picture.
Yes.
Actually, what are the biggest challenges Norway faces internally? Because we know from time to time there are problems with immigration, with criminality in the broadly speaking Scandinavian region. Is this true for Norway, or has Norway been luckier?
Well, immigration, of course, brings with it challenges. Luckily, we have avoided some of the developments that we've seen across the border in Sweden. Yes, we've had immigration in Norway as well, but we made sure that the immigrants live more spread around the country, no ghettos, so to speak, as you unfortunately will find some examples of in Sweden. In terms of the crime, yes, we have challenges as well, but it's not comparable. So certainly also for our country, that is indeed a challenge, but I think it's a hotter topic in Sweden for good reasons, looking at the number of statistics of murders and of serious crime.
Why I'm asking this is Putin is very adept at using all of these tensions within Western societies and weaponizing them. Do you feel that this is happening in Norway too? Are there some problems that Russia uses in the hybrid war, in the informational warfare?
No, that's certainly true. That what we see is that they don't create conflict or polarization. They take something and then they use, enlarge, and employ it, so to speak. We had, in the years between the invasion, occupation, annexation of Crimea and what happened in eastern Ukraine 2014 and back up now to 2022, yes, there were more disagreements within Norway on how to stand up to Russia. And there was a tendency that people living all the way up north closer to Russia were not so eager to continue to stand with the rest of Europe when it comes to sanctions. And we could hear this refrain because, I mean, you're perfectly right, our population is not very big, but very long country with distances, and you get sort of a center-periphery divide. And we could see the Russians trying to play into this. That luckily, in a sense, the brutality and the images coming out of Ukraine has almost completely removed that conflict line. I think across Norway now, there's condemnation of the war of aggression, and there's not really much room for the Russians to operate in that regard. But threats come in many forms these days.
Definitely. What are the biggest threats? Are there sabotage? Is there any kind of, spyware activities against Norway by Russia?
Well, I'm not going to necessarily rank them, but we are very well aware that we are among the most digitalized countries in the world. And that's a potential vulnerability, absolutely.
I'm asking about this because Slovaks, the citizens of Slovakia, my home country, also know about the brutality of war in Ukraine, and they know about the brutality of Russia. However, Russia is quite successfully exploiting our weaknesses in the cyberspace, and Russia has managed to turn the attitudes of many people in Slovakia. And even those who are shocked at the brutality, they, tend to say, "Oh, it's actually not Putin's fault. There was nothing else for him to do. He was provoked, etc., etc." And this is, the byproduct of the hybrid war. So, how do you manage to keep the consensus, the broad consensus in Norway, that certain things are true and certain things are false?
Well, I mean, we see the challenges as well with social media, with the use of artificial intelligence and conspiracy theories. But broadly speaking, we are in the fortunate position that in society that there's a significant amount of trust in the media, that they're independent in terms of the government. So luckily, we don't really see those challenges, and in addition, we're also in the fortunate position that we have significant energy resources, meaning that there's no need whatsoever for us to import another oil or gas from Russia, because we export.
And there's no fear that you
exactly,
off.
which is of course not directly linked to the information space, so to speak, but there is of course linkages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In Slovakia it's different because of the concerns about energy, one thing, and the other thing is, the level of the inter-society trust is very low. I guess, I don't remember the numbers, but Scandinavian countries rank very high in trust between people and the trust of institutions. Is it true?
Yeah, I think I've seen similar rankings, and that's actually extremely valuable for so many things in a society, that there is actually a significant amount of trust still.
Would you offer any advice how to keep the levels of trust or how to increase them? The situation in Central Europe is different in many ways, but we are a small country as well. We also have regional differences like you have. We have the center, and then we have the regions that are a bit far off and think a bit differently about certain topics. So maybe you could offer us an advice.
Every country needs to find its own path, but I know for a fact that when it comes to rankings of press freedom, our countries and our neighbors, we all do very well also. Meaning, at least from my point of view, having a real independent media is crucial for trust in society as well. It has to do with good government, corruption-free government. There's no such thing. I mean, there are cases in Norway as well. Luckily, very few. But when there are, they're brought to light and it's dealt with. And then we might see a small dip in trust. But over time, the fact that it's actually brought out in the light and dealt with over time seems to maintain trust in society, in institutions, and in politics.
That's great. You know, we envy you, but also it's in a very positive way, of course. You keep it up, and we'll strive and strong. Thank you very much for coming here and talking to us. And have a great day at Glaubsat.
My pleasure.